What's this flow option in here? Anybody know? Like we've talked about opacity. Go back to a hard brush for a second here. And not 100% opacity. Bam, there it is. That's whatever your foreground color is. If I drop the opacity, say I hit 5 on the keyboard, that gives me 50% opacity. And if you overlap them, what opacity would that be? Any thoughts? I mean, this is 50 and then another 50. If they overlap, it works out to about 75 actually. It kind of pulls it a little bit closer each time. If I keep hitting it, it will eventually reach 100%. Okay, but the thing about opacity, if I click and I don't release the mouse button, as long as I keep painting around, it will never go beyond whatever the opacity is, which is how I usually use my tools. If you've got a soft edge brush and you want 50% opacity, click and drag, and you don't have to worry about it going beyond 50%. If you're trying to fill in an area fairly smoothly with an even tone, as long as you don't release, 50%. If you let go and click again, you get another 50%, but where they overlap, you start getting those increasing amounts, which can be tremendously useful for kind of building up the intensity of what you're trying to work on. But what is that flow option? Let's talk about that for a second. If I bring the opacity up to 100%, there's your 100% opacity, cool. But if I bring the flow way down, say do like 5%, there's 5% flow, bring it up a little bit higher. Okay, kind of like a low opacity, right? Except I've still got the mouse button held down. Look what happens if I go back over top of it. Eventually, it'll build up intensity until it reaches whatever the opacity is set to. So at 100%, it'll start out low. If I keep going back over the same spot, I can eventually build it up to 100%. So some people prefer using flow. It's almost like an airbrush. When you start painting, it starts spraying paint out. If you hold it in one spot, well, it's going to eventually reach 100%. I mean, if it was actual paint, it would start dribbling down the wall. But the thing about the opacity, it will never reach anything beyond what your opacity is, no matter how long you keep rubbing around. So that's the difference between opacity and flow. And whichever you prefer to work with is totally up to you. I'm an opacity person myself. Maybe you guys prefer the flow.